The best of Julia Hartley-Brewer on Talk.
What Labour has faced, of course, is this battle with the Corbynistas on the left of the party, which Keir Starmer no doubt has done very well on. But we did see some of those Corbynistas, the leading man, Jeremy Corbyn, coming back as an independent. We've seen at least 4 independents running against and defeating Labour, what would have been easy Labour seats on the issue of Gaza, on the issue of Palestine. How big an issue is that going to be in the coming Parliament?
I think that is quite a big subplot in this election. For the first time, foreign policy, something happening way outside our own country, came straight onto the electoral agenda, certainly outside our control, and yet you'd have thought from the independents and the organisation around them that Keir Starmer had somehow created this conflict and was sitting on his hands and doing nothing about it. Absolutely ridiculous. But there's another characteristic of it, Julia, if I may say so, and that is the very ugly bullying and intimidation and violence that was meted out by a lot of these independent candidates towards their Labour opponents. This was very, very unattractive. I fully understand that emotions run high, people feel passionate about what's going on in Gaza, but they don't have to take it out literally and physically on their political
That has been
opponents.
a big change over the years we've been involved in this. Can I ask you, just in terms of the delivery, we've got, the first 100 days is supposed to be, the big point, you pushed all these big measures. Again, it's the same in tray, whether it's Rishi Sunak sitting there in number 10 today, or whether it is Keir Starmer. Still no money, massive debt, 2 wars ongoing, Middle East and in Ukraine. What is going to be first on the agenda?
I think what will be first on the agenda would be those first steps that they set out during the election campaign. The teachers, the NHS appointments, the border control team that's going to be set up, and the 2 or 3 other first steps. But beyond that, there is so much work to be done to turn around both our economy and our public services. And they have to have those plans clearly in place. They have to remind the electorate, because in the fog of this great battle that we've just gone through, probably people have long since forgotten the manifesto, what the government is going to do, and then buy that goodwill and take the public with them. We
shall see. Now, just before I let you go, we do expect Rishi Sunak to speak outside number 10 in just a couple of moments' time. We'll take that live. But Lord Mandelson, you've been a Labour MP. You're now a Labour peer. We've seen one other Tory peer returning as Foreign Secretary, David Cameron. Fancy returning to the front line as Foreign Secretary?
I am going to return. I am going to return. To the people from whence I came. By which I don't mean Hartlepool, and I'm very glad we regained Hartlepool last night, but I'm going to go back to the sheep and the cattle and the horses where I live in the countryside.
Will you take a job in the Labour
I will do absolutely anything and everything to help support this government.
Yes, isn't it?
Short of taking a job in the government.
You will not take a job if offered?
I'm not lining up to do a job
very non-committal there. Lord Mandelson,
no.
Very much appreciate
you heard it from me first.
I'm not sure what we heard, though, there. I still can't work it out. I have to let you go. Thank you so much for joining us. Very much appreciate that. That's Lord Peter Mandelson, of course. So many different headlines, but you never actually named Huw Edwards at the time.
No, we didn't. We thought long and hard about this story with all sorts of issues with privacy, libel, everything we thought about, and also trying to protect the privacy of the youngster. Obviously, there was huge public interest in running the story because he was fueling a drug habit, and the parents that came to us were absolutely distraught.
Yeah. And that's the thing people forget.
This is what the story was about.
Well, look, let's have a little watch and listen of a little package we put together, sort of just giving people the timeline of this story and how we've learned perhaps the truth about the man that we saw on our television screens. Let's have a watch and a listen.
Who is this? Top BBC star in Sex Pics Probe. Massive story on the front of the Sun. I think, A, the BBC, given the circumstances, owes it to licence fee payers to tell us. Be honest with us, we pay your wages.
Yeah. Second young person is alleging that this BBC presenter, who remains unnamed, got in touch with that young person using dating applications.
tonight at 10.
He's one of the BBC's highest profile and highest paid stars. Huw Edwards' wife has come forward to say her husband is the suspended BBC presenter.
And we mustn't use mental health as an excuse for his behaviour.
Let's talk right now about Huw Edwards. He arrived at Westminster Magistrates Court today and pleaded guilty to 3 counts of making indecent images of children.
I mean, it's a horrible, horrible, disgusting. I mean, I don't have the words to describe what Huw Edwards has been doing.
One day after the disgraced BBC News anchor pleaded guilty to receiving sex abuse images of children from a paedophile, the media landscape has shifted. Today, even The Guardian said the Sun's initial story feels more than vindicated.
It has been an extraordinary journey, has it not? Victoria Newton, editor of The Sun, still with me in the studio. So what was your reaction when you heard yesterday's guilty plea from Huw Edwards?
Well, I mean, I kind of expected it. Once we knew he was being charged, I thought he's probably got little choice here but to plead guilty. But having said that, you never know until it actually happens. So there were the gasps in our newsroom.
Yeah, I mean, because when you first exposed a major BBC star as having been involved in sending money in return for explicit pictures to a teenager, and then it emerged that Huw Edwards was the man involved, as he's such a figure that's been on our screens forever, a national sort of, just treasure. She was actually named by his wife, not by the Sun newspaper. The Sun was absolutely castigated, attacked from across the board for having opened, I suppose, a can of worms in terms of the story about Huw Edwards. What was it like when you've done a story which you knew to be true and you knew involved a vulnerable teenager, and you mentioned that his mother had been pleading with the BBC to stop Huw Edwards contacting their son, and yet you and your journalists, the newspaper, once again under attack for a true story?
That's right. I mean, people perhaps don't realise that we'd been getting information about Huw Edwards' behaviour going back to 2018. So we'd already seen patterns of behaviour. Some of those other stories that had come to us over that time, we didn't think raised the threshold of public interest enough to publish them. But when this story was presented to us, the parents were so desperate, they'd gone to the BBC 2 or 3 times, got nowhere. They'd gone to the police, got nowhere, no help. They're working class, ordinary people. And they felt that when they went to see the BBC, they were treated like a piece of dirt on the bottom of somebody's shoe. Yeah. So they came to us as a last resort for help, and we felt we had to give them a voice, and most importantly, we had to stop that money being paid to that teenager, and that's actually what we did. But of course, the whole world seemed to turn on us, because it was as if the liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity. And of course,
BBC
he wasn't.
Good, Huw Edwards good, tabloids, The Sun especially bad.
Well, we knew, because of the history of the calls that we've been getting about him, we knew his patterns of behaviour. And of course, when we ran that story about the teenager, suddenly the phones went crazy with more people ringing in, and we built up quite a dossier of evidence, which we did then hand to the BBC.
So they have known for quite a long time this was not a one-off. Here's the thing. When you've got people who have genuine concerns about the safety of their children, and we know that there has been a rise in violence. You can see videos from again and again where often it is involving migrants, some recent arrival of migrants. I mean, the stats are very clear when you look at violent assaults and sexual assaults across Europe, where you've had rivals from certain parts of the world, that you are seeing cultural differences, which are, we couldn't call it that, inverted commas, but actually attitudes to women, attitudes to violence, gang crime has erupted. I mean, off the scale in Sweden, Germany, Austria, France, Italy. It's not a coincidence, okay? And it's been happening here. Now, here's the thing. How do people having concern about the safety of their children, concerned about issues like mass uncontrolled immigration, concerned about illegal migrants, the boats coming over from Calais, how does that then get solved by people throwing bottles and bricks outside a mosque or at police in London?
And it doesn't get solved through such thuggery that I would never condone. But when people harbouring those concerns, and I, to a certain extent, harbour some concerns about the increasing Islamification of Britain. There, I've said it. When people harbour those concerns, but I won't throw bricks, then see politicians, senior police officers, talking on about social cohesion. It's broken this week, we know that. About the joys of multiculturalism, and that is not their experience. That is not what they see. They may have moved out of an inner city area to a different place because they felt their demographic of the population was getting squeezed. None of which the thoughts and concerns they harbour are particularly Islamophobic or racist, but they're concerned. The street they lived in as a kid does not reflect in any way, shape or form what it was 50, 60 years ago.
No, I mean, I live in an area, and generally you go 2 or 3 streets and you won't hear anybody who speaks English as a first language. I mean, literally no one on the street is speaking English.
But the politicians would have us believe that we live in this
you're not even allowed to say that. I mean, even saying that is apparently an awful thing to say. Just kind of, in terms of the just short on time, in terms of the policing of these various different, there's a big contrast with what happened in Leeds a few weeks ago, and talks about Muslims and inflamed tensions and how we need to address these needs. Didn't have any of that language when it came to dealing with what the effectively called the thugs in Southport. And indeed the policing, we had very heavy-handed policing outside Downing Street last night.
And here we go. More fuel to the fire of the people that are concerned and might throw bricks. Go to Hare Hills. What do you see? Scores of police officers running away from the bricks that are being thrown. Fast forward to London last night. Full public order kit, helmets, shields, a lot, battering people to the ground.
Yeah.
And who were throwing the bricks in Hare Hills? Brown-faced people. Who were getting battered to the ground last night? White-faced people. These are facts.
The stark reality. But even saying it, well, you're far right, you're racist, you're bigoted, but we need to talk about it. If you don't talk about things, you can't get to the bottom of things.
Of course we do. And I'm only 18 months away from getting my old age pension. So if anybody wants to cancel my career that I've never had, I really don't give a damn.
The best of Julia Hartley-Brewer on Talk. The best of Julia Hartley-Brewer on Talk.
The latest migrant numbers this morning, we're expected to have official confirmation that we have seen more than 20,000 Channel migrants crossing on small boats since July the 5th, when Keir Starmer took over as Prime Minister. He said he was going to smash the gangs, he was going to get on top of this, abandon the Rwanda policy. We know that more people come in the summer months than come in winter months. So is this to be expected, or do you think that actually this is a big Labour fail?
Well, what's interesting isn't just the 20,000 number, 20,000 nearly all young men who come from completely different cultures, and many of whom will go straight into criminality. Sorry, but that's the brutal truth. The other numbers are interesting. Another 6,000 have gone into hotels since the 5th of July, and returns, quarter three returns of those that are not allowed to stay here is down even from last year. So by every measure, the Labour government are failing. Smashing the gangs will not work because the incentives are so big. When a gang can make €2 million during a calm week in the summer or autumn, it doesn't matter what you do. You can put people in prison. You can threaten them with the death penalty. More people will come forward because there's so much money involved. And so between them and the Conservatives, there is a total failure to understand. The only deterrent, and by the way, I said this, Julia, 4 years ago, when I went out into the Channel to try and highlight this issue.
Remember this,
the only deterrent is deportation. And deportation will not happen, all the while the European Convention on Human Rights is written into UK law and used by judges. And Starmer's second speech as Prime Minister was how much he likes the ECHR and why we would never leave. And the Conservatives had a choice between Robert Jenrick, who was, well, it was like a Nigel Farage tribute act, really. But hey, I did agree with what he was saying. And the Conservatives have opted for a leader that doesn't want to leave. So,
Kemi Badenoch has said early last week in her first big policy speech, made it about migration. We have to stop being squeamish about it. She said that leaving the European Convention on Human Rights wasn't even the most radical thing that they might have to do.
I shall do such things. They shall be the terrors of the earth. Yes, I know. It's nonsense. She's a continuity candidate. Nothing's going to change. And I'm sorry to say that this is a national security crisis. There are people coming in here with ill intent towards our country. Of that, I've absolutely no doubt. Frankly, it's calamitous.
Let me also ask you about something that certainly was calamitous for many of us over recent years, and that was lockdown policies pushed largely by organisations like the World Health Organization and others, in complete breach of all previous pandemic planning, indeed our own pandemic plan. You and I were both people who, after supporting the beginning of the first lockdown, had major concerns against this being unevidenced policy. There's a lot of concern that the World Health Organization is moving towards being a body, and previous government, this government, where basically they take over all control of any pandemic planning in the future, taking all that control and power away even from national governments, who are at least in some way minimally accountable to us people. We know that Donald Trump's got big issues with a lot of those big organisations like the World Health Organization. Now, you are part of a sort of a body sort of looking at basically what's called the Bell Review, looking to either reform or possibly even replace the World Health Organization, and they're launching today. Tell us what that's about and what the plan is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm involved with an organisation called Action on World Health, and that is because we are so alarmed at what happened with lockdowns, with the medical failures, with vaccine mandates, with the loss of individual liberty, but now national sovereignty as well. The World Health Organization, which is heavily funded by the communist Chinese, and which covered up at the start of the pandemic the true cause of it, got everything wrong all the way through. They are now pushing for what they call a global pandemic treaty. They tried to get it through the General Assembly of the WHO this year and failed. They're going to come back next year for more. The British government, when they're asked about this, deny the truth, which is, if we sign this treaty, we give them the power to tell us to lock down. We give them the power to tell us which drugs may be appropriate or not. We give them the power to say a certain percentage of our vaccines might need to go to Africa or somewhere else. That is an unacceptable loss of sovereignty anyway, and to give it to a group like this, which is clearly heavily politically influenced by Bill Gates, the Chinese communists, and goodness knows who, that is unaccountable in every way, is wrong. And yet, just 2 weeks ago, the Labour government announced we're giving them another £310 million of British taxpayers' money to a failed organisation. Now, Trump coming in to the White House... I was
just going to ask you about this, yes.
Yeah. So Trump coming into the White House, his new medical team are totally opposed to vaccine mandates in principle, and they absolutely would not want lockdowns of any kind occurring, let alone those imposed by a treaty from the World Health Organization. So Dr. David Bell, on our behalf, with 8 other medical professionals, is doing a full review into this, how much money we give the World Health Organization, and why, using Trump's government as the lever, we need to press for radical reform of the World Health Organization, or we leave it and start something else. And I think this really matters. I mean, this is Brexit Britain. We voted to be a sovereign country. We cannot be a sovereign country if we're part of the World Health Organization with its plans.
She must be good. She must be great because she's a woman and she's black and she was chosen for those reasons. And she's, well, not Trump, which was, as far as I could tell, pretty much the only reason she campaigned, the only policy she offered in Kamala Harris's entire shtick. It was just, I'm not Trump, he's awful, he's a fascist, I'm not him. Well, she's lost. She has lost more badly than pretty much any Democrat has for decades, it would appear, on the numbers that have come in. Not a single county across any state, across America, where any result has been declared, has seen her reap any more votes than, or even as many votes, as Joe Biden in 2020. That tells you something, doesn't it? Well, there we are. The woke lefty progressive tears are flowing today, but there is an awful lot of cheer. Now, whether or not people should be cheerful about a Donald Trump victory is yet to be seen. But I, for one, I'm going to be honest with you, having wept with horror in 2016 at Donald Trump's victory, and having kind of shrugged with, well, I think it's the right outcome in 2020 when Joe Biden won, I've got to be honest with you, really damn chuffed that Donald Trump has won today. I've been saying for weeks, if I had a vote in the US election, I would, on balance, choose Donald Trump. Do I think he's a nice guy? No, I don't. Do I think he's a fascist? Do I think he's Hitler? No, I don't either. I think he's probably unfit for public office. I think his questioning of the peaceful transition of power in 2020, 2021 was absolutely unconscionable. He faces numerous criminal charges, although those will disappear certainly for the next 4 years and probably forever as a result. He's already faced some convictions. However, at the end of the day, he was the best choice, I think, not just for America. He was the best choice for the world. And I think the best choice it will turn out for Britain. Why do I think that? Well, it's really, really simple. Because he's not an insane, progressive, woke, net zero, open border, trans inclusion lunatic, which is what Kamala Harris and the Democrat Party of the United States currently is. Oh, yeah, exactly the same as our current Labour Party. Do I think that we will benefit from that? Well, a lot of people say that Britain's an outlier. Britain is so different from what's happened in America, this vote to the right. What's happened across Europe, votes to the right. We elected a left-wing government on July the 4th, did we not? Except I think people are reading it wrong. And my God, we've seen some lefty pundits reading it wrong in the last 24 hours, have we not? Hi, Rory Stewart, if you're watching, through your tears. I think the real lesson that needs to be learnt about what happened in July was not that Britain bucked the trend across the Western world and voted to go for a left-wing liberal progressive government over a conservative government on the right. On the contrary, they simply rejected a left-wing progressive woke conservative government. I think the lesson that needs to be learned here in Britain and of course in America as well, is that when you push policies that make people poorer, when you push policies that damage the interests of individual people trying to look after their families, when you push policies that mean the lights could go off because you're so insane on your net zero green posturing, when you push policies that put girls and women at risk and basically have a policy of just doing outrageous, awful things to poor, damaged, vulnerable children under the name of trans inclusive ideology. When you do all of that, and when you say, yeah, let's just not even have a border, let's just import, in the case of America, more than 10 million people, illegal arrivals to your country, and you do nothing about it, the people will say no. And I think the people will say no here in Britain as well when they get the next chance.
The best of Julia Hartley-Brewer on Talk. The best of Julia Hartley-Brewer on Talk.
I mean, I would have thought also the woke issues, again, I think that is a very big issue for an awful lot of, certainly parents, I think, as well. But you say, you know, she has great qualifications. She was so good that she was rejected by pretty much all Democrats back in 2020 as a Democrat candidate for presidency.
In this country, that's what the primary process is all about.
Yeah, exactly. But you're saying she was such a good candidate, but she was, when the Democrats got to have a say on to have her as a candidate, which they didn't. If you're going to have me on the program, then shut up and let me speak, okay? Antoine, I was speaking and you interrupted me.
No, well, if you're going to ask me a question...
No, I haven't finished asking you the question. You interrupted me.
If not, then I won't come on the program. Period.
Antoine, I was asking a question and you interrupted me, so I carried on talking. That's not me interrupting you.
I'm going to answer.
Can I ask the question? Can I ask the question and then you answer it? Would that be okay? I'm saying she was so bad as a Democrat candidate.
That's not a question. Just ask the question. The question
Antoine,
would be what happened in the 2019 primary?
As a general rule, I don't enjoy men telling me how to speak, so I'd rather you stop doing that. As a general rule,
if you're a journalist and ask the question, don't give a statement.
If you allowed me to ask the question, I could finish.
No, you keep giving a statement. Ask me a question.
Right. Okay. Mr. English graduate here all of a sudden. Right. Okay. Antoine. I'll start with an if that makes you happier. If she was such a good candidate in 2024, why was she rejected so fully in 2020 as the candidate when you say she's got such a great track record and she was an absolute failure, absent from the scenes as a vice president? Question mark.
Well, that's simply not true. Maybe understanding the role of the vice president will help you give context to the role she played in the Biden-Harris administration. And the primary gives us an opportunity to make a choice. The general election, you're given a choice. She did not win the primary. The country moved on. Our party moved on. She became the vice presidential nominee and then became the vice president of the United States.
Okay, I thank you very much. As a politics graduate, I do actually understand the American political system. Thank you for the little lesson. I appreciate that. She not only did not win it in 2020, she wasn't even in it for the first actual vote because she had so little support. She was considered such a poor candidate. She wasn't elected as the VP candidate. She was appointed. She wasn't elected as the presidential candidate.
That's not true.
She was chosen.
That's not true. She was elected as vice president of the United States the same way Mike Pence.
Candidate.
The same way Mike Pence was elected as vice president of the United States when he and Donald Trump were both elected together. They were on the ticket
She was elected as the VP, yes, as part of the ticket, but she wasn't elected as the candidate. She was appointed to the candidate.
Well, that's the same thing. She was elected. She was appointed as a candidate and elected
the long
as
winter
vice
nights must just fly by in the Seawright household. Antoine, do you think that the Democrats are going to learn any lessons at all from this? Because if we're going to still see candidates being selected who are, as she was viewed in her one term in the Senate, as the most sort of far left radical candidate, if they're going to have someone who is appointed, Joe Biden was very blatant. He chose a short list of black women to choose from, that based on her skin colour and her genitals.
Well, that's not true. That's not
again,
true.
That is true. Do you think the Democrats are going to learn anything from this and move forward?
Did you speak to Joe Biden and ask him what was the reason he chose Kamala Harris to be his nominee?
He said he was only going to have a woman, and then it was narrowed down to it was going to be a black woman, and all the women on the shortlist were black women.
Did you speak to Joe Biden?
Oh, that's such a ridiculous question.
Okay, you didn't. Oh, okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
I mean, that's such a ridiculous. I mean, that's. Do you want to answer the question? I mean, since you feel very strongly about me asking you questions, do you want to answer the question I asked you?
Well, if you didn't speak to Joe Biden directly, then you can't assume who he chose to be his vice president.
It just happened there wasn't a single person who wasn't a black woman who was good enough to be his VP.
Well, do you know that? Because I didn't know.
No, I don't know. Obviously, he thought that because he didn't have a single person who wasn't a black woman on his shortlist.
I didn't know you were involved in the process.
Are you under the illusion that people have to actually be in the room or in America to understand or know anything about American politics? Because I think this is kind of the problem with Democrats, thinking that everyone else is stupid. Do you think that's working well for the Democrats? Because I don't think it is, because I've just looked at the election result. I think basically telling everyone else that if they don't agree with you or they don't say exactly the words you like, that they're just stupid. I'm not sure that that's the winning strategy.
Well, I didn't. Did you hear me say that?
I think it was implied.
Oh, okay. Oh, so you made an assumption. I understand. Thank you.
Oh, is there anything else you want to say?
I hope you have a great morning.
Oh, I'm having a much better morning than you.
Oh, you're making another assumption because I'm having a great morning.
You're having a great morning. You're a candidate. You're a Democrat strategist. I mean, I'm not in the room with you. I'm not in your head. I'm not in America. I'm going to guess that you're not happy about this result that you don't accept has actually happened yet.
I'm happy that millions of Americans had the opportunity to express themselves at the ballot box. And if Donald Trump prevails as the President of the United States, we're going to accept the results as Democrats, and we're going to move on to fight the next election, because in this country, we settle our differences and disputes at the ballot box. I'm proud as an American that millions of people gave their expressions at the ballot box.
Well, I agree with you on that. Thankfully, we got to a note of agreement. Antoine Seawright, a Democrat strategist, thank you for that. How has this not already been the law? Young people are going to have their benefits docked if they don't take up training or apprenticeship offers under under a new back-to-work scheme to be announced later this month as part of a youth guarantee. Councils and mayors are going to seek out hundreds of thousands of people aged 18 to 21 who are unemployed or off sick. An awful lot of young people now claiming to be off sick, to offer them help finding a job or training. Ministers say they will not be allowed to remain outside the workforce. So the Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall says she's going to publish a 3-point plan to get people back to work. Well, let's talk about this with Justin Urquhart-Stewart. He's an economist and also the chairman of the Regionally Investment Platform. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much, Steve, for joining us. I mean, this sounds great. I mean, God, I'm old enough and ugly enough to remember, YTS. Hold on a second. What are you holding? Sorry, if you're watching on YouTube, you've got a cat. That was very sort of James... Well, you're holding it over your shoulder for those who aren't watching on YouTube. It's very sort of James Bond baddie in his red braces holding a large cat. Very disconcerting as I looked up and read.
Yes,
anyway, I'm old enough and ugly enough and not cat holding enough to remember YTS, the YOP scheme, Youth Opportunity Programmes, and all the different schemes you've had over all the years to basically say you need to be either in school, in training or in a job. But we've got millions of young people who aren't working. Do you think this scheme will finally work?
No, as it is now, as you correctly say, we have lived through those statements of various governments year after year, and what's their reaction to it? Very little. Now, one of your view, we go back in history to possibly someone called Norman Tibbett. Go down on your bike, you'll find a job, and everyone got upset about that. But actually, that was the case, and people did. Now, also, so actually putting some discipline into it, if you happen to just say, taking some benefits, then actually you should be expected to do something about it.
Yes.
Or you have the benefits taken away.
A bit of workfare. If you're a young person, a nice little bit of workfare wouldn't go amiss, would it?
That's the positive side of that, actually, so making sure you're actually going in and doing something and not just spending your time in bed the entire time. Otherwise, you lose that whole attitude of work and the positive attitudes that will help your body and all sorts of things. The other bit, which is a threat, and your more chance of actually get reaction, is it's not just your benefits, but unless you do something, some of your family's benefits are going to get affected. So to what extent does the father, the mother, brothers, sisters, you're not doing anything, you're getting all of these things, and we're going to be penalised because of what you're not doing.
Yeah.
Now, that's the negative, but you can do so much on the positive side. For example, actually getting people back into work and giving them a modest incentive so that they stay in that job for a year, 18 months, 2 years, whatever it happens to be. They can actually prove how much they've actually been bringing in. There may be some form of reward at the end of it.
No, wait a minute. The reward is getting paid.
Well, that's part of it, but if you also actually break the system in terms of, get them out because they're not there to penalise them, but then make sure they're getting in work and giving them it's carrot and stick, more stick.
Okay, but we've barely had any stick, and this is the thing that I don't understand. Parents, do your job. Your child should be working. I know an awful lot of middle-class parents who go, well, he's not doing any work at the moment. Well, I'm sorry. So, in 2 weeks' time, the locks are being changed if you can't pay rent. Go and get a job. I find it extraordinary. I mean, especially young people. Again, a lot of these young people, they haven't got many qualifications. Well, don't set your sights too high then. Be lucky to get some minimum wage work. I mean, it is extraordinary how many young people are out of work. And if you don't work when you leave school or leave uni, your chances of ever getting a job are pretty darn slim.
Now, what you can do, though, there are jobs that I have to say, some are going to be pretty menial, labour jobs and things like that.
What's wrong with that? I've done plenty of those.
And I'm not showing off. I ended up working on a building site and got any money because that's what you had to do. I can't go back to the family because they're not going to support me, quite likely. But it makes sure you've taken responsibility for it. Yeah. Put that responsibility back into society, and if they're not going to help, then I'm afraid the bigger family is going to actually suffer as well. So nothing like having a grandfather saying, you are lazy toe rag, get on with it, is going to have a far more effect than that she's just losing some benefit, but you'll still get something.
But again, this is one of my things, though. It's like often it's like the doc benefit, so you lose a tenner a week or whatever it is. At the end of the day, you're probably still living, you've got a housing benefit, costing hundreds of pounds. It should be really, really simple. You're leaving school. Have you got a job? No. Well, good luck with that. But your family are going to be having to spread their... because it's largely often families who are also claiming a lot of benefits. They're going to have to be funding you, or you're going to starve because there are still plenty of jobs, especially at that menial level. And I wasn't too good for them, and you weren't too good for them. I'm guessing Claire wasn't too good. My audience would have been too good for them. I would sweep the streets. I've cleaned toilets. I've chopped onions in a burger takeaway. I don't think any job is beneath anybody.
I don't think so. I wasn't much good, I have to say, on Southampton docks, and I do, sorry to say, I'm pompous. I had to change my name as well because Justin doesn't go down quite so well for a Labour.
All the Urquhart Stewart. Can I ask though? I mean, has your cat ever done any meaningful work, or does it just sit around showing its bottom to the camera?
As yet, nothing at all. Much more interested in actually turning around showing a bottom to whoever happens to come through. But I can't actually put her out to work yet. I thought a treadmill might help, because that might improve possibly the wind power that we're getting through. But not even that, I'm afraid.
I think that our party is at a crossroads. We are the most successful political party in the history of Western democracy. But there is no guarantee that we're still going to be here next time. Those of us who are MPs now, all of us who are party members...
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Can I ask you, I think your hair is on your mic, and I think it's... yeah, could I ask... Yeah, I do apologise. Just an easy listen for all.
Is that better?
Thank you very much indeed. Apologies to interrupt.
And we need to make sure that we've got a Conservative Party to hand over to the next generation. So this is about fixing ourselves before going to the country and saying, oh, why don't you give us another go? Here are some new policies. Nobody trusts us right now because they don't think we delivered last time. So we
They don't think you did, or you didn't?
We did do some things, not everything. We were often talking right and governing left, but that doesn't mean we didn't do anything. We actually did a lot. So I'm not here to trash the last 14 years. I am standing to show what we did well, what we didn't do well, but what the future looks like.
OK, so what did you do well?
Well, just look at the last few years. Can you imagine if Jeremy Corbyn had won the 2019 election and was in charge during COVID? That was an extremely difficult time for the whole country. Look at what we did with the vaccine task force, for example. You look at the inheritance we had in 2010. We managed the economy well. If we hadn't, we would not have had the money to spend during COVID. You look at what we did with education, shot up the rankings internationally in England, whereas where Conservatives weren't in control in Scotland and Wales, look what happened there.
And yet, if you look at public services as they are now, the stuff the government's actually been in charge of, I've been asking ministers for the last couple of years, name me a public service that works.
They do work, but they have challenges. And these challenges are not specific to the UK. When I was Trade Secretary, I went all around the world. Every country was dealing with the same things: ageing population, immigration, cost of living, inflation, post-COVID supply chain issues, what to do about China. Everybody was worried about China. These are not things that are unique to the UK. But what we have got into is a technocratic managerialist rut. We've had too many people who talk but can't do. I am an engineer. I know how to build things, and that's what my platform is about.
There's a lot of talk about conservative values. What are conservative values? And a lot of talk, you say the party has talked right, but government left. So many times I would cheer on an announcement from the government, and Rishi Sunak was like, oh yeah, that sounds good. Whether it was on, we'll come on to issues like trans and climate and net zero thing. Oh, they're getting sane on this stuff. They're going to do something, and then you wouldn't actually see anything happen. A lot of Conservative Party members feel that they're not right-wing, certainly not far-right, as they have been called. They are simply Conservatives, but the Conservative Party has shifted massively to the left, to the extent that it's basically a Lib Dem, Blairite Labour Party in lots of ways. So tell me, what are, in your view, Conservative values?
Well, there are very many of them, and they are the things that made this country great. Equality under the law is a key one. So not treating different groups differently, making sure that everybody is exactly the same. We don't have tiers and hierarchies of citizens. You look at what's happening, for instance, with sentencing. Look at this extraordinary story today about Huw Edwards. Lots of people are asking, why is it that it feels like there are different rules for different groups of people? That's a Conservative principle which we have not enforced properly. Another one is personal responsibility, not believing that the government is there to service you and be a concierge for all your needs, that people actually have to get up and do quite a lot of things for themselves. And if they don't, then they need to understand that there are consequences for that, and there isn't always a permanent safety net. I think those are the sorts of principles that we have not really spoken about. We've spoken about policies a lot. We'll cut waiting lists and we'll have more GPs. Those aren't principles. If we start off from what we believe, that's what brings the trust in.
OK, I'm going to come back to Huw Edwards in that sentence as well. But can I ask you about winning back power, because ultimately the point, as you say, the Conservative Party has long been an election-winning machine. Did not win, and I think no one expected the Conservatives to win at the last election. People might not have wanted the Labour Party to win, judging by the actual vote for Labour, but they certainly didn't want you guys to still be in power. Is it conceivable to you that the Conservatives can win the next general election without winning back those voters who turned to the Reform Party and Nigel Farage, 4.2, I think 2 or 3 million people? And how would you go about winning them back?
So we certainly need to win Reform voters back. In my constituency, when I was knocking on doors, it was former Conservative voters who were going to Reform. So we certainly can't win without winning back the people who we lost at this last election. But there's more to being a party, a winning party, than just being an election-winning machine. These are some of the mistakes that we've made. But we need to find somebody who can win without asking, what are we winning for? Because when those people do win, then they don't know what to do, and then they don't have a proper agenda, which is what we're seeing with Labour now. You know, I sort of caught glimpses of David Lammy's speech. Very, very unserious stuff. We need to ask ourselves what we are winning for. What is the vision? What is the agenda? And that's what I think that we need to talk about.
The best of Julia Hartley-Brewer on Talk. The best of Julia Hartley-Brewer on Talk.
Let's talk about, well, we do this often, don't we? Sort of the latest woke madness that goes on, that people can try and say, oh, it's just silly culture wars started by the right. It's not. It's just us trying to bring sanity back to the country. Let's talk to James Esses. He's a social commentator and co-founder of Thoughtful Therapists. Good morning to you, James.
Morning, Julia.
Lovely to speak to you. So much I want to talk to you about. Can we just start with a letter that you have organised and got signed by a frankly cross-party group of MPs, peers, psychiatrists, psychologists, doctors and consultants, many others, expressing their grave concerns about the Prime Minister's plan to have a trans-inclusive ban on conversion therapy, because your worry is this is going to effectively criminalise parents who, when a kid says to them, I think I'm trans, I'm born in the wrong body, and they say, well, you're not born in the wrong body, you're not a boy when you're actually a girl, etc., that they would actually effectively be criminalised. How on earth can this be allowed to happen?
You know, there was a period of time in which people could claim naivety to the harms that have been caused in the name of gender ideology, but in light of the independent Cass review and elsewhere, that time is up. And so the government now are knowingly seeking to embed gender ideology further into our legislative fabric, in essence. Now, you know, people who hear the term conversion therapy, they think of abhorrent things, you know, corrective rape, electric shock therapy, all the rest of it. Those things are undeniably abhorrent and thankfully have long been criminalised. This bill will not stop torture, as some activists claim, because torture is already illegal in this country. Yes. This will criminalise talking therapy, conversations between a therapist and the client. And we've seen similar legislation passed elsewhere, and it's had a real chilling effect to the point that therapists are simply refusing to work with children struggling with
because
these
it's not worth. But I mean, look, you had your training as a therapist basically terminated. I know you've won a case about this because you refused to toe the line on a lot of these issues. We're at a point when therapists are just terrified for losing their jobs, losing their licence for giving good therapy, because any therapist, frankly, who is telling a child, yes, you may well be born in the wrong body, frankly, I think should be struck off because they're telling a child a lie.
Well, it flies in the face of kind of core therapeutic ethics, which is not to affirm delusional thinking. But, you know, you're right. I was kicked out of my course and kind of excommunicated from the profession because I dared to raise concerns about potential legislation. If this legislation goes through, therapists en masse will refuse to work with these clients. And it may also, and we've seen this in Australia, end up potentially criminalising parents. Yep. Who fail to affirm their child's...
And we've seen, I mean, some American states as well, we've seen children taken away from parents who refuse to use their preferred pronouns. And I'm telling you, I wouldn't if it was my child. I've done it. I've refused to do it with a friend's child who insisted and said, No, I refuse to be forced to lie. I won't do it. And the child's in tears. And I said, I'm sorry, but your right to your feelings doesn't trump my right to facts. It just doesn't. And I think we need more people, teachers, therapists, others, to do this and not play along with this YouTube generation. And we need, certainly, frankly, more people like you who do speak up on this, because this is a massive risk. And it's a massive risk to the children. We know the children who often think this. Those children invariably, that much higher rate of autism. They're gay children who there's some issues in their family about them being gay, children who've been abused, children who have many other mental health issues. And then people just put a label on them and, that's the solution to the problem, giving them these drugs to change their bodies forever. And it's abuse. And it's just abuse, and it's got to stop. But this is someone who's employed to do this job, along with other men and women, who has done his job tackling a violent criminal. We know that. That's not a matter of opinion. That's in his court record, OK? That's been decided repeated, unless we've just got a whole load of juries that are completely and utterly corrupt. This man doesn't represent them. This man is the enemy of the so-called black community. This man is exactly the opposite of what the so-called black community need to have. When we talk about getting justice, what we want is justice for ordinary people, black, white, Asian, whatever, who want to be able to walk around their streets safely, knowing that someone's not going to drive by and open fire on them.
Right, and that's right also. And if he was involved in that lifestyle, then he deserves to be brought
we know he was.
And hold on, and held accountable for his action. No, we don't. And just because, as I said to you, if you are going, it's like a theatre. That's all they created. This was not about justice. This was just about making look like that you followed the procedure.
No, he made himself look like he was a criminal because he was a criminal. I don't know about you. I don't regularly get into a car and drive the car that was involved in 2 shootings in the last few days. It never happened to me.
Julia, if it happened to a white young lad or an Asian young lad,
I would be applauding the police officer the same.
I'll have the same attitude as I've got today. So it's not about black, and we're not. It doesn't represent the black community, nor do my views represent cross.
Okay,
it represents my own personal
Final point. We know that the police in America have got an issue. There's a trigger-happy issue with some of the police in America, getting their guns out all the time. That's not what is the case. You have to be very highly trained to be an armed police officer in this country. We also know that they deal with 4,000 incidents where armed police are called to every single year. And yet we look at 1 or 2 shootings max, when weapons are even drawn a year. We're looking at 0.01 or 2%. I mean, well under less than 10% of 1% of cases where they draw their weapons. Is it not right to conclude that police are not trigger happy? They're not just having a bad day, so they feel like going out and shooting a wrong 'un, black or white, that actually when they do draw their weapons and when they do fire, it's because they absolutely feel they need to. Is that not a fair conclusion to draw?
I think a fair conclusion to draw is that anyone can have emotional triggers. Anyone can have mental problems, and it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time.
It just randomly happened when there was this man in the car.
Not randomly. This could be the straw that broke the camel's back. But the simple fact is, this officer would not just have got here just today. It would have had symptoms going through, and this is what I'm concerned about. Because yes, even though we've got an exceptional history of not being gun-toting, but when we don't want to get it there either. So much about just providing safeguard is about common sense to prevail, and let's see justice for all to prevail.
We did. That's what we saw. Yes, we saw justice, and that police officer is going to now be free. He may well face some sort of misconduct charges and work.
And he should be thrown out the force. No 2 ways about it.
I would shake his hand for doing a job keeping us safe. Ken Hinds, I don't think it's possible to disagree with you more.
The best of Julia Hartley-Brewer on Talk.